So the Center for American Renewal, which is a more populist-aligned organization trying to support more populist ideas in the think tank world, one of the few that's legit, like unlike America First Policy Institute. America First Legal is very good. That's Stephen Miller. America First Policy Institute is a bunch of corrupt deep state hacks aligned with Jared Kushner and big oil money out of Texas, pretending to be the substitute cabinet for Trump. I mean, Trump, you can't underestimate his foolishness in that regard of thinking they're America First, but they're not. And some of those people affiliated with them use the big tech lawsuits to promote themselves, those big tech lawsuits that lost quickly because they were poorly drafted. But the Center for American Renewal is a much more legitimate organization. People like Kash Patel, others affiliated with it. And they filed a referral request and a kind of a whistleblower complaint, but it wasn't from inside information, to the Internal Revenue Service. Charles Rettig, who I know from back in the day, it's another story for another day, is what I think about Charlie. But the outlining how Zuckerberg and Zuckbucks, as it came to be known, not only committed election bribery, as identified by the special counsel appointed former Wisconsin Supreme Court justice in Wisconsin, by co-opting the election machinery, the administrative state regulating the elections in key areas, but also engaged in massive scale $400 billion worth of tax fraud, and did so by disguising his partisan political activity as nonprofit 501c3, nonpartisan, non-political activity. That he used that as the front to do it, both because it was easier to co-opt various election government agencies in the effort to it was basically a one massive Democratic get out the vote effort, which included illegal drop boxes, the refusal to enforce rules. The state legislatures set rules for how electors are to be appointed, governing their elections in the terms of signature checks, in terms of who was qualified to cast a mail-in ballot, how they cast that mail-in ballot, all the drop boxes detailed in 2,000 Mules and all the issues that involved. When he's talking about the different organizations that were involved in this, D'Souza, almost all these organizations depended upon the money funded by Zuckerberg through establishing those illegal drop boxes and mass mail-in voting and questionable qualifications of voters and no signature match check and no adequate counting and canvassing of the ballot in the first place. And what's amazing is it's Zuckerberg. So, of course, he took a tax deduction for all of it. So he wrote this off as a tax deduction. Not only to use the 501c3s as a front in order to be able to infiltrate election government agencies, including the Georgia Secretary of State, by the way, Ratberger, took millions of dollars from Zuckerberg to do his bidding. And because it gives them more money to hire more people in their staff and make themselves look good and promote themselves, etc. It was also where they targeted this, right? It'd be one thing if they were across the state of Georgia, for example, but it wasn't. You track where they spent the money to ensure there was a maximum get out the vote effort through drop boxes and mail-in balloting, delivery of ballots, etc. Outside of the legal framework, it's overwhelmingly in Democratic-oriented counties. So that's where they targeted their efforts. So that shows it was purely partisan. But it goes beyond that. As Molly Hemingway for the Federalist has detailed in a range of pieces, they often hired Democratic political consultants. So, I mean, these nonpartisan, non-political organizations are almost all invariably run by longtime Democratic activists, number one. Number two, they were using much of the funds to pay Democratic political consultants to come up with a Democratic game plan. And the only reason they have tax-free status and the only reason that donors to it get a write-off on their tax returns is because they're supposed to be non-political, non-partisan, purely charitable entities. These were not 501c4s. These were 501c3s, pure charities. No, you can't get involved in politics. And here they were overtly doing it. And then he took probably the assumption is, a $400 billion tax write-off. So he not only committed massive scale election fraud in 2020, Mark Zuckerberg committed massive tax fraud in 2020.
So first of all, I mean, the argument is going to be get out there and vote is nonpartisan. We pick populated areas, which tend to be Democrat, and we employ the best of the best in those areas, which tend to be whatever, call them Democrat-aligned think tanks. Does that, I mean, That's going to be the rebuttal argument. Is that not going to hold any water?
No. I mean, remember the Tea Party organizations are being shut down for being political, even though they were 501c4s, which allow certain forms of political activity. If you want to be involved in politics, you can't be a 501c3. It's that simple. Everybody knows this. And these were overtly political organizations. What he did is he funded organizations that had pre-existing budgets, but they were pretty small budgets. And he all of a sudden converted them for politicized purposes. I mean, if they weren't hiring exclusively Democrats, if they weren't paying Democratic consulting firms, if they weren't targeting almost exclusively Democratic areas, maybe it'd be a different story. But that's what happened. And so their ability to pretend that this was nonpartisan when it was overtly partisan, and in which there's wide-ranging evidence of in their hiring practices, in their promotion practices, in their expenditure practices, etc. To me, it violates the point and purpose of a 501c3 organization, and thus they shouldn't have tax-exempt status, and Zuckerberg shouldn't be allowed a tax deduction. And in my view, he knew this all the way through, and he just committed fraud to perpetrate the election hoax that he wanted.
Well, so let me ask you that. The consequence is going to be what? You have to pay back some money that you deducted as.
I mean, what it should be is prison for 20 years.
That's where I'm getting with this. We'll get to the.
We're talking about a $400 billion tax fraud. It would be the biggest tax fraud case in the history of America.
This is what they funded into these entities to get out and vote in Democrat regions.
400 million.
This is through Facebook. This is not Zuckerberg. This is through Facebook, the entity, not through Zuckerberg.
No, it was Zuckerberg personally, he and his wife.
See if that's even worse, actually. But
yes, it is.
Okay.
And my guess is if you dig in deeper, you'll find Zuckerberg used Meta, Facebook's new name, and Instagram to manipulate elections even further. You'll find that he used it to let Democratic voters know, people that they use their algorithms to figure out who's a democratically inclined voter, and then used their institutional resources to promote Democratic stories, suppress Republican stories, promote Democratic candidates, suppress Republican candidates, and make sure Democratic voters got out to vote and didn't do so with Republicans. That you've had massive election fraud by one of the biggest big tech companies that now also involves tax fraud at multiple levels, violation of state laws in multiple states. If Brnovich, that wuss in Arizona, who got whooped in the Senate race, deservedly so, I mean, his wife's on the federal court because Trump put her on, and that was another mistake. But had any, he says he's serious and sincere about this. Zuckerberg should be under massive criminal investigation. Trump and Giuliani shouldn't be under criminal investigation for asserting constitutional rights and exposing election fraud. Zuckerberg and Facebook should be under criminal investigation for engaging in an election, and now it's apparent tax fraud.
We had discussed this earlier as well. I mean, this is personal on Zuckerberg's side, but then we had floated the question, suppressing a story could be deemed to be a contribution in kind. When Facebook got involved.
These were illegal donations. They were disguised illegal donations. That's what they were.
It sounds an awful lot exactly like what was described in that Time magazine of a secret.
I mean, they bragged about it. And Zuckerberg did this in part for his own political reasons. He did it in part because they attacked him so much for Cambridge Analytica, which had no meaningful impact on the 2016 election. That was a crock. But, and did it because George Soros brought massive pressure on him. Was trying to short his stock, was waging war on him. And Zuckerberg realized if he helped defeat Donald Trump, George Soros would go away. And he did. And he used George Soros methodology, create non-governmental organizations to do so. The problem is he violated state and federal law, tax law, and election law in the process.
Well, so which state is going to be the first to take any action? Justice Department.
Well, Wisconsin could have, but they've kind of wussed out because they have a corrupt political leadership in the Republican Party there, and including the majority leader of the House. And that's still the hurdle. The hurdle is still the main hurdle to institutional election reform and exposing the bad acts are leaders within the Republican Party, and in some cases judges that Trump appointed. As we'll get to the special master case. I mean, it's these old establishment Federalist Society type folks. The publication The Federalist has nothing to do with the Federalist Society. The Federalist Society has been co-opted for a long time by corrupt deep state actors who favor institutional power at the expense of ordinary people, and always have and always will. And that's one of the main hurdles. The only way to answer that is in the court of public opinion, hoping somebody has either the brains or the brouhaha to actually take action in these cases, because it's getting egregious.
Well, I mean, we're going to get to it, but we're seeing the tax issue cases that Letitia James is filing against anything Trump in New York. We see the lawsuits that are being filed seemingly by activist law firms against DeSantis. There are red states, Texas, maybe Abbott, Florida. I don't know how much of this could have been argued to have been done in Florida. Is it a question of finding a Republican governor of a Republican state to say, let's pull a little Letitia James in our state, but let's make sure it's a little bit more legally sound?
Well, DeSantis ran a clean shop in Florida, and that's why, by the way, if you note Florida, which almost always trends with the rest of the country in terms of direction, Florida went more Trump than it did the cycle before, right? So Florida didn't have any of these late reporting problems. That's because they got strict rules and they were strictly enforced. DeSantis replaced some of the Broward County corrupt people himself personally. He's taken out corrupt DAs in Florida. So that's why it didn't happen much in DeSantis. But any local county prosecutor could bring these claims. That includes Georgia, Arizona, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan. There's Republican rural county prosecutors who clearly have this power. They're just not exercising it. They're not utilizing it. And that's a mistake. They've got to start to wake up. I mean, the reason why they're waging war on J.D. Vance and Blake Masters is because both of them understand it's time to quit being unarmed and pretending that we're in Marquise Queensberry rules when we're in a gutter fight. And you got to respond accordingly. And, within what the Constitution allows and permits. This was illegal behavior, unconstitutional behavior. Constitution absolutely permits and requires for confidence in election integrity that Mark Zuckerberg and his allies be criminally prosecuted for what they did.
Are you betting, or it's just not going to happen?
Not going to happen anytime soon. It will require new gubernatorial elections. Maybe if Kari Lake is elected in Arizona. Maybe if the Republicans win in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, or some combination thereof. Maybe they'll suddenly discover some cojones in Georgia. Not likely with Ratberger likely to get reelected as Secretary of State since he's implicated in this corruption. And maybe if Trump wins in 2024, something will finally happen. But it will likely require major election change and continued effort in the court of public opinion to put pressure on people to take remedy, because this is outrageous. To see this, here you have one of the biggest tax frauds ever, one of the biggest election frauds ever, and nobody's even investigating this person.